While libraries are supposed to be places where people can learn, other things can and frequently do happen there. Some of those things are nice, but others are downright terrifying. Here are 3 stories about happenings in libraries that people didn't exactly expect. Story 1. My name is Blake, and this story took place a long time ago, back when I was in about the 8th grade. As I'm sure almost everyone else has done at some point, I had put off a report until the last day before it was due, and so I found myself at the library at 9 o'clock at night. Our library was on the bigger side. It wasn't huge by any means, but it did have a basement and a second floor. I'd usually go down to the basement to work on things like book reports and other stuff, because it was more spacious and very quiet. There were big chairs, and there were also lines of desks with computers nearby. I'd already been down here for about 2 hours or so, when I thought I could hear a gentle tapping coming from somewhere about 2 aisles over. At first I didn't want to look over there because I just wanted to get my stuff done and leave. But eventually the tapping kept on going. After what seemed like about 2 minutes, I finally set my stuff down, got up, and looked around. At this point I should mention that there hadn't been anyone else down there with me, but I had assumed that someone had come down in the meantime and was out looking at the books somewhere around me. However, when I turned around, I couldn't see anybody. The tapping was still going, so I decided to investigate. I locked my laptop and put a few papers in my folder. Then I turned back in the direction I had previously been looking and started to walk forward. I think the basement was kind of an old part of the library, and it had that typical library smell. There were a lot of shelves with books on them, and I'd say the entire basement was probably about the size of a basketball court. As I moved around the shelves, it seemed like the tapping noise always stayed about 2 aisles away. I tried going from one aisle to another, but I never saw anything. I also didn't see anything out of place, like books on the ground or something sticking out noticeably from one of the shelves. After another minute or so, I figured that someone was probably trying to mess with me, and I started thinking about who it could be. There were other kids in my class that were working on the same report, I was sure, but usually I'd be the only person who would come to the town library to work on their stuff. Soon after that, I started to get really annoyed, and I just wanted to say to whoever was messing with me to stop. I just wanted to get done with my book report since it was already after 9 o'clock. I debated whether or not to just go sit back down and try to hammer it out, or to keep walking around trying to find this person who was starting to really annoy me. After another minute or so of searching, I finally decided to go back and open my laptop again. At that point, I had had about another hour's worth of work, and I figured I could knock it out relatively quickly if I hurried. I decided to check my phone to see if whoever was messing with me sent a text message or a call, but they didn't. So I just got engrossed with my laptop again and started to write. After another couple minutes, the tapping sound was just tuned out by my brain, and I didn't hear it anymore. But maybe 10 minutes after that, I noticed that it was starting to get louder. It wasn't just tapping anymore, it was like a full-on banging. Like someone was banging on one of the metal bookshelves. At that point I had had enough, and I got up, locked my laptop, and called out, "Hey, stop it." The knocking did stop momentarily, but about 10 seconds later it started again, and this time I was really starting to get pissed. I quickly walked from aisle to aisle, looking down as far as I could see, but there was still nobody. And just like before, the sound always seemed to come from about 2 aisles over. Eventually I started to jog, and then run, and then full-on sprint. I really couldn't believe that someone was going through this much trouble to try to mess with me. I still couldn't find that person, or whoever it was. And so at that point, I decided to go back upstairs and let someone at the library know. The only thing was, I didn't want to leave my laptop and the papers and books nearby. So I went back to where I was sitting, shoved everything in my backpack, and then made for the stairs. I was really fed up at this point, and was trying to think about whether or not I wanted to just go back home. To finish the report, I need to check out about 2 or 3 books, and lug them back, and I'd prefer to just work at the library since I didn't have to take things back and forth. But at this point, I really didn't want to keep staying here with whoever it was down in the basement annoying me. The stairs back up were kind of in the middle of the basement, and when I got to them, I took one last 360 look all around me. And that's when I noticed him. Or maybe I should say it. In one of the corners, far against the wall, was a black figure. And I don't know if it was a person or not. I know that sounds silly to say. Whatever it was about 7 feet tall. It looked like just a big shadow, and I couldn't make out any of the features, but I knew it was something there and not just a shadow from one of the bookcases. I froze where I was standing, not knowing what I should do next. I locked eyes with it for about 10 seconds, and then to my horror, I saw it starting to move. It didn't even seem like it was stepping, more like it was just rolling towards me. And it wasn't moving very fast, it was moving very, very slow. I finally snapped out of it and ran back up the stairs. I went back to the room where people would check out the books, and thank God there was a lady working there. She saw that I was disturbed by something and asked what was going on. Then I explained that I had been working on something in the basement when I heard a tapping and then a knocking sound, and how eventually I was going back up the stairs and then I turned around and saw that figure, or whatever it was. The lady didn't seem surprised, since I guess a lot of kids mess around down there sometimes, and she went back with me to check it out. We got back downstairs, and of course, it wasn't there. I pointed to where I saw it, and so we went in that direction. We got to the wall, but of course it wasn't there. So we started to snake our way through the different aisles. I also looked through the aisles, where books were missing, but I couldn't see anything in the next aisle over either. And just like earlier, there was nothing out of place. No books on the floor, stuff sitting out of the bookcases, other random objects. It was just empty. There wasn't any sound either, no tapping or knocking or anything else. After about a minute or so, we stopped our search, and I was trying to figure out if the lady believed me or not. Based on her facial expression, I think that she still believed me. And like I said, it was probably because kids went down there and messed around all the time. I asked her if there was any other way to get out of the basement, and she said there may have been another staircase somewhere else in an employee section downstairs, but she didn't really know. Apparently she was just a volunteer, or it was her first day or something, I'm not really sure. So all we had left to do was go back upstairs. Because I still had to finish my report, I went ahead and checked out 3 books, and then rode my bike back home. Nothing else really happened with the story, and the report I turned in the next day was fine, I guess. About a week or so later, I went back to the library to do something else, and out of curiosity, I asked the person at the front desk if he knew anything about something that happened about a week ago. He looked at me and didn't seem sure. So then I told him that I had talked to a lady before about someone playing games in the basement, and it seemed like he knew what I was talking about at that point. He said that he and a couple other people had reviewed the surveillance footage, but didn't see anyone either entering or leaving from the basement, except for me and the lady who worked there that night. They also reviewed the footage from the other cameras, including the camera at the main entrance, but there wasn't any mysterious figure going in and out of there either. So there really wasn't much else to do at that point. I kept going back to the library periodically to work at stuff, but I never saw whatever that was again. But I also never went back down to the basement again. Personally, I don't really believe in the paranormal, but I still have no explanation for what I saw there that night. Story 2. This happened to me a few years ago when I was a freshman at college. I don't want to say which college because I don't want the person in the story to find me. I took a job in the campus library to make a little bit extra money. It was actually very boring and I had almost no responsibilities at all. Basically, my shifts usually came down to me just sitting on my phone at the desk playing games. Occasionally people would drop off books where I was and I had to enter them in the system and then restock the stacks. But like I said, not a lot of people came in there. Nothing really out of the ordinary happened for about 2 or 3 weeks or so, but then that's when it started. Before going into what exactly happened, I do want to say that I think I look relatively attractive. I don't mean to toot my own horn, but I do occasionally get glances from guys when I'm out and about. So one day when I was sitting at the desk, a man came up to me and put a book on the desk. Naturally, I expected him to just put the book on the desk and then leave, which was how people usually return books here. But eventually I noticed that he wasn't leaving. Instead, he was just staring down at me with kind of a smirk on his face. He looked to be college age, like me, maybe a couple years older. He was very thin, and he was wearing a t-shirt with another shirt over it. He was also wearing cargo pants and sneakers. After a few seconds, it was really awkward, and finally I said, "Can I help you with anything?" He started to chuckle and say, No, I think I'm good. And then, even more awkward, he just continued to stand there. By this point, I had put my phone away and had started to reach for the book so that I could scan it and eventually walk back and put it back on the shelf. But right when I tried to grab it, the man put his hand back on it. Initially, I was confused, but I was also weirded out, and I figured that he was trying to come on to me. I looked at him in the eye again, and he still had the exact same expression on. Next I said, "Well, I'll need to take this and scan it back in. Thanks." I pulled the book out of his hand and then went over to the other area that had the scanner on it. I took a few steps away from the man and scanned the book, but all the while I was watching him out of the corner of my eye, and he never moved. Finally, I started to get fed up, and I turned to him and said, "Is there anything I can help you with right now?" To this, the man didn't say anything, but he looked down at the ground, maybe at his feet, but I don't know. He then turned around and walked out of the little foyer area, leaving me just standing there looking at him. I made sure to watch him until he fully left the library. Then I actually scanned the book and began to walk over to the area where the system told me to put it back. As I did, I noticed that the book was a kind of anthology about different romance novels. I don't know why, but I decided to open it up and look inside. Almost right away, I noticed that there was something between two of the pages. And when I turned to those pages to see what it was, I noticed it was a note. It read, and I quote, "Hey, I've seen you around campus lately. I think you're very beautiful, but I'm also very shy. I know I wouldn't have the courage to tell you this in person, but would you like to go on a date with me sometime?" And it was signed, Steven. This obviously confirmed my suspicions that he was coming on to me, and it was awkward and cringe as well. I mean, I don't really have anything against a secret admirer, or I guess guys trying to work up courage to ask a girl out. But the way the man just came into the library and was staring at me made it really creepy. I decided to just take the note out and put the book back on the shelf, and then just go about the rest of my shift as usual. In a couple hours, when one of my coworkers got there, I mentioned what had just happened, and she agreed it was extremely creepy. After a few minutes, I decided to get a bite to eat before walking back to my dorm room. There was a street with a couple of shops and restaurants right on one side of the campus, so that's where I decided to walk to. Because I felt pretty safe on campus, I'd usually walk places alone. Though, after the events of the story, that kind of changed my mind. Anyway, I was walking over to a sandwich place called Stanley's when I got the sense that someone was following me. I think you can guess what happened next. I turned around and there was the man. And like before, he was just standing there. This time, because we were outside, he was standing at a bench about 20 feet away. I thought about confronting him then and there, but for whatever reason, I decided just to keep walking to the restaurant, get my food, and then leave. Luckily, there wasn't much of a line, and after the person in front of me ordered, I started to tell the employee what kind of sandwich I wanted. But then my heart sank as I heard the door open behind me. I turned around and, sure enough, it was that guy again. This time I actually did decide to do something about it, because I was getting really fed up. I think I said to him, "What is your deal?" And to that he just looked down at his feet again. He wasn't moving, and for some reason that made me even more upset. I told him extremely sternly to please leave me alone. I didn't want to get into a shouting match in this restaurant, but things were almost at that point. The guy then turned around, just like he did in the library, and walked back out. The lady who had just ordered and the person behind the counter both looked at me with a very concerned expression on their faces. I shrugged my shoulders and told them that he was some guy who just came on to me earlier that day. It seemed like they understood, and a few moments later I had my sandwich and I was starting to pay for it. I turned around and walked out of the store and then started heading back to my dorm room. All the while I kept scanning the area around me, knowing that that guy was just lurking somewhere, waiting to walk into my path. Luckily, he wasn't, or at least it didn't seem like that. I got back to my dorm room a few minutes later, came in, locked the door, and started eating my sandwich. I had my laptop open and I was watching videos on that. I assumed that my roommate was at class, since I think she had class at that time this semester, and I didn't expect her to be back for about another 3 hours or so. So when I heard a knock on the door after about 10 minutes, I was justifiably concerned. I put my sandwich down, in a state of frustration, and walked over to look through the peephole. There was no one there. I was debating about whether or not to open the door, since it was probably that same guy. I decided to go back to eating my sandwich and watching videos, and told myself that if I heard another knock, then I'd go open the door. But I actually didn't. The rest of the night played out like normal, and even the next week went by without any incidents. But fast forward to a week later, when I was back working in the library. I was just coming in to start my shift, and the lady at the front checkout counter was talking to someone returning a book. Even though I saw him from his back, he looked very familiar. After putting his books down, he turned around and looked at me, and you bet it was that same guy. We locked eyes, and I just stood there, not knowing what to do. I was still creeped out and rather upset, but I hadn't expected this to happen when I walked in for the shift today. After a few more moments of him just staring at me, I tried to say in my most professional way that I was not interested in anything, and that if he was done returning his books, he would need to leave the library. He looked at me sheepishly, and then walked around me to the door. The lady behind the desk was rather confused, and so I explained what had happened a week ago. After that, she laughed and told me I was too harsh on him, which I didn't really appreciate. Anyway, after a couple minutes, the lady was leaving, and so I sat down and took my phone out. This time I decided to watch something on Netflix, but a couple minutes into the movie, a thought occurred to me. I checked the system to see what the last books returned were, and I saw that they were all romance novels. Out of curiosity, I went to where the books had been put back, and checked them one by one. Sure enough, one of the books had another note in it. I took it out, and this is what it said. I'm really sorry about what happened, and I want you to know that I never tried to hurt you or to scare you. I just thought that you were really beautiful and I wanted to spend time with you. Don't worry, you'll never see me again. I'm going to leave college and get on with my life. After a few moments, I put the note down, not knowing how to feel. I was relieved, because for some reason the message did seem genuine, and that would mean that I wouldn't have to see that guy again. But I also felt a bit bad. I mean, was it that unusual of a situation? Did this guy just really have bad anxiety, and then it made the situation worse? I don't really know. I still think about this every so often, and when I keep coming back to it, I feel a little more bad each time. Anyway, I just hope that whoever that guy was, he's living a better life. Story 3. When I was in middle school, my friends and I would go to the library periodically. In addition to using it as an excuse to not do homework and chores, there were a couple shops nearby, and we used to hang out on the street corners there. One of those shops sold electrical components and other sciencey stuff, kind of like how Radio Shack used to be. And though my friends and I didn't really consider ourselves to be nerds, we did walk through there occasionally and see what they had. The store owner was named Wally, and I think he was probably close to the stereotypical, very enthusiastic science teacher. He was always very excited to see us, and would start telling us about circuits or computers or something else. The first couple times we went there, we just thought it was really funny and started to laugh. But eventually Wally kind of grew on us. I don't know, it's kind of hard to describe. He was almost like the lovable character from a TV show. One day, about 30 minutes after me and my friends hit up the library, we decided to go to the row of shops to get something to eat. There was a place that sold burgers and hot dogs that we all really liked, and so we went there. We walked back outside on the sidewalk eating our food, and decided to just walk up and down this little street. Eventually we came to Wally's store, and decided to see what he was up to that day. Now, one of the things about the store was that people weren't allowed to bring food and drinks from outside, which made sense since there were a lot of little components and things in there. So we took a moment or two to finish up our hot dogs, and then walked inside. Wally was there just as we expected, only this time he didn't seem very excited to see us. Instead, he looked rather scared, and when we had opened the door, he seemed very startled by that. My friend Jeremy said, "Hey, what's up?" And Wally said, "Hey." It was actually kind of jarring because he had been so enthusiastic every other time we'd been in his store. We walked around the bins for a moment, looking at each of the different gadgets inside, but we started to be concerned with Wally's demeanor. Eventually I asked him if he was feeling okay, but Wally didn't say anything to that. He just looked around nervously. A minute or two later, and we were pretty much done in there, and decided to walk back out the front door. But just as we were going to do so, we stopped. There, on the other side, were like 3 dudes in suits, and one of them was blocking the door, so we couldn't even walk out of it. I turned around to look at Wally, only to see him cowering behind the counter. My friends and I started panicking. We didn't know who those men were or what they wanted. Then to our horror, we noticed that all 3 of the men were looking in our direction through the front windows. Jeremy called out, "Wally, where are you?" And we heard him say, "Back here." We went behind the counter to the little employees area, where Wally was just sitting under his desk, trembling in fear. We asked him what the hell was going on, but he didn't want to say anything. After we kept asking, he eventually told us that whoever was outside was after him. We asked why or who they were, but he didn't say any more. Instead, he told us there was a back exit, and told us to use it. We stood there for a moment, not knowing what to do, but eventually, we figured that we needed to leave pretty soon. I asked Wally if he wanted to come with us, but he didn't say anything. I asked again, and eventually I heard a faint no. My friends and I looked down at him, and I think none of us really wanted to just leave him sitting there. Then Jeremy asked him if he wanted us to call 911. He didn't say anything. After sitting there and thinking for a moment, the other guy in our group, Chase, suggested that we go ahead and leave and then call 911 on one of our phones. That definitely seemed like the best option. And so we went out the back way that Wally told us about, which led to the alley behind the stores. We were so paranoid when we got outside, and we kept looking around, expecting to see somebody in a suit coming for us. Luckily we didn't, and we started to book it to the side of the shops that was closest to us. When we got there, we turned the corner, looking around, and we didn't see anybody there either. Chase got out his phone and called 911, and we explained the situation. We told them that we were in Wally's store when 3 menacing figures showed up at the front door. The operator asked us if they were carrying any weapons or if they said anything, and we told them no, but Wally seemed very afraid. The operator told us to stay on the line and to try to move to a safe location while police were on the way. A couple minutes later, we heard sirens, and my friends and I came around the corner, back to the front of the stores, to see 2 cop cars in the parking lot. We waved and started to walk towards them. We basically explained the same thing to the cops, and they told us to wait there while they went and checked the store out. And so we watched while they walked over to the store. We saw them walk inside, and about a couple minutes later they came back out, but they didn't have anyone with them. They started asking us for more details, apparently to see if they had gone to the right store. We confirmed that they did in fact go into Wally's shop. One of the cops then told us that they searched and no one was there. We didn't know what to say, and we thought that Wally must have snuck out the back after us, or, God forbid, those guys got Wally and drove off. After that, there was a big police investigation, and it was in the newspaper and on the news. It was this big to-do, and it was really sad because Wally was never seen again. And it was strange because he just left his store as it was. The police tried to contact him, calling his phone number, visiting his house, checking back on his store periodically, but apparently he was nowhere to be found. As far as I know, no one discovered anything about Wally or those 3 men, like who they were or what they wanted. I think the leading theory was that Wally owed them money, like maybe he had taken out a loan from a loan shark to cover the cost of his business, but even that no one knew. So it seemed like that was the end of the story, and eventually his store was cleared out and another store moved in. I honestly don't remember what was there, but the unexplainable thing was that 6 months later, when me and my friends went back to the library, I swear that we saw Wally there. We were inside the little lobby area, looking at some books in a display case, and I think Chase was talking to the girl behind the counter because he really liked her or something. Just then Jeremy turned around and said, "Hey, you guys, look!" About 20 feet outside of the library, just standing on the sidewalk, was Wally. Or who we think was Wally. It was hard to tell because he was wearing a trench coat and a hat. We stood there for a moment not knowing what to do, but then I think we all agreed that we should go out and see him. We walked over to the doors and opened them, and Jeremy started waving his hands and saying, "Hey." But Wally, or whoever that person was, quickly turned away and started walking back down the sidewalk. We were a little confused and kept walking after him, all the while Jeremy kept calling his name. Unfortunately, that person parked in one of the closest parking spots, and they immediately got into their car, turned it on, and drove off. The four of us were just left standing on the sidewalk, wondering what exactly just happened. Now, we have no way of knowing if that really was Wally, though from his height and the way he was walking, we're actually pretty sure. And even if that had been a completely different person, we thought that they would at least act surprised or say something, like, "Hey, I'm not Wally." After that, we never saw Wally again, or that person again, if they happened to be two different people. And unfortunately, we never heard anything else about Wally in the news after that. It just goes to show that sometimes there can be friendly, innocent experiences that end all too soon. And wherever Wally is, I just hope that he's okay.